Simplex converted to a Great Western Railway Prairie tank. This is part 27, silver soldering the superheater and checking the petticoat pipe. If you're a beginner to the hobby and don't know much about steam engines, you may be thinking, what is a petticoat pipe and what does it do? The primary function of a petticoat pipe is to focus the exhaust blast from the blast pipe up the chimney. And because the chimney is airtight, this blast of exhaust steam up the petticoat pipe, pardon the expression, draws more air over the fire, so the fire burns brighter. In this clip I'm seeing how easy it is to remove the petticoat pipe when everything is in position. Once the engine is fully assembled, from time to time I may need to remove the petticoat pipe to give the wet header any attention should it leak or change the superheater or anything like that. By the way, despite mentioning in the video at the time that the superheater element does not go through and over the fire, I still received questions about it. While I remove the smoke box, I'll explain. My superheater element falls short of being over the fire by about an inch, so it doesn't really need copper welding or brazing. Also, the block on the end of it is threaded. Time will tell, but I think it will be okay. I also received questions about the bolts holding the wet header in place, and as I mentioned in the video at the time when I was fitting them, these are temporary bolts. And here's the wet header flange once I remove the bolts. In this episode I'm going to silver solder the superheater element into the wet header. Originally I was going to do it in a different way, so the hole in the wet header is 3/8 of an inch in diameter. And what I'm doing at the moment is making an adapter. I'm turning down the outside of a piece of brass to 3/8 of an inch. When I've drilled a 5/16 of an inch diameter hole down this piece, it will fit in the hole in the wet header. I'll mention this early on. This is going to be a small piece of tube, which makes up the difference between the 5/16 of an inch, which is the superheater element diameter, and the 3/8 of an inch diameter of the hole in the wet header. This part that I'm machining has to be a bit of a rattle fit in the wet header, and the hole down the centre has to be a loose fit on the 5/16 of an inch diameter superheater element. After saying this, I'm sure that probably some engineers or armchair engineers have possibly stood on a chair in the middle of the room with the fingers of one hand in the light bulb socket trying to figure out the best way to reach the switch on the wall over the other side of the room. Thankfully, I don't think like that. I would have turned the power on first. Why does it have to be a rattle fit? Well, that is to allow the silver solder to penetrate the joint. If it's a really tight fit, the silver solder can't get in there. After applying copious amounts of silver solder flux to the parts, it's time to silver solder the parts together. And as usual in these tutorial videos, I always apply the silver solder early, so it blobs on the work, to show people that this is what happens if you don't have enough heat. As you can clearly see in this clip, once the part reaches the correct heat, then the solder flows and flashes around the joint, and I always apply too much anyway. I've also silver soldered around the steam fitting at the front. This fitting will be piped to the snifting valve, which allows cool air into the superheater when the engine is coasting. Back over to the lathe now, and it's time to make a flat union for the other end of the superheater element. You can buy these as commercial items, but it's not something I use very often, so I don't have any. This steam union has to fit inside the nut, but as you can see from this clip, it's currently a bit tight. The other end's okay. When I turn the nut round, that's a good fit. So I think if I shave off about 3 or 4 thou, it should fit perfectly. It doesn't want to be tight or slack, it needs to be just right. What I should have done is made a few of these whilst I was making one. But recently, ever since I made 4 studs, I'm a bit fed up of mass production. That's the part to the correct size. I'll just try the nut on again and make sure, yes, that's a perfect fit. The next thing to do is use a centre drill first to drill a hole in the end of the bar. You must always use a centre drill first because a long twist drill would just wander about. Once the hole's been successfully centre drilled, as you can see, it guides the main drill through in the right place. This is a 5/16 of an inch diameter twist drill, and it's just the right size for the 5/16 of an inch diameter superheater element, which for this application is a bit of a rattle fit. Don't forget, the silver solder needs to penetrate the joint. All I need to do now is part off the finished component. After the part drops into the chip tray, which I do keep very clean these days so I can find things, it's time to pick up the part and fit it into the chuck the other way around so I can face across the front. This ensures that the mating surface is perfectly flat and also a good finish. I also removed the sharp edge using a file. Once again, it's time to go into the outer part of the workshop on the brazing hearth. After thoroughly cleaning up the end of the piece of copper pipe, which had become oxidised by the previous silver soldering operation, I applied a copious amount of Easy Flow No. 2 silver solder flux to the joint. And now it's time to apply the heat as I did with the other end, but not quite as much heat. This part is much smaller than the larger lump of metal at the other end, so in no time at all it gets to the right temperature. And one more time, for the purpose of the video only, I'm applying the silver solder slightly too early. You will see that it only flashes around the joint when the temperature reaches the correct level. I didn't show it in the previous silver soldering operation, but once the parts have turned to black, I quench them in water. As today is the 31st of October 2020, yes, it's Halloween, I thought I'd show the quenching of the parts in my acid bath. Here we are in a very dark corner of the workshop. I don't get many trick-or-treaters. I don't know why. In this clip, I'm carefully lowering the freshly soldered superheater element into the acid. This is a long item and actually the bones are getting in the way. But eventually, by careful manipulation of the silicone rubber tubing that I used to lower the parts into the acid, the superheater element settled on the bottom and I replaced the lid. I'll revisit the acid bath tomorrow and see what it's looking like. Happy Halloween! Stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my main Steam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.